Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning, pleasant good morning to everyone. Today, Monday, the 23rd day of April 2018. I trust that everyone had a wonderful, restful weekend. I want to give a big shout out to everyone. I want to give a big shout out to all of you neighborhood watch groups out there. I was told that I should give a good shout out this morning to everyone, those of you who have formed the neighborhood watch groups and those who are intending to or in the process of forming them or as well. So big shout out to you because not only are we our brothers and our sisters keepers, but we also have to be our neighbors keepers, as well these days. So big shout out to everyone. I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. For the Record is a show produced by the staff and management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor, and you're welcome to join me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Our phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls. Normally, that beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson. You can call us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flo. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. If you don't like to talk on the telephone, then email us at For the Record. That is one word, For the Record, at candw.ky. You can also send us a WhatsApp message or leave us a voice note. That WhatsApp number is 925-3261. So we definitely invite your participation, and there are many, many ways for you to get in touch with us. And I have provided you with all of those numbers as well. So it is our pleasure to have in the studio with us this morning the Chief Officer in the Ministry of Health, Environment, Culture, and Housing, Ms. Jennifer Ahern. And also with us, we have Ms. Janet Flynn, who's the Senior Policy Advisor in the ministry. And this morning, we will be talking about human tissue donation and transplant. We will be talking about the legislation, laws, and the regulations as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to say good morning to these two beautiful young ladies in the studio with me. We'll start with Miss Jennifer, the Chief Officer. Good morning. Welcome back to For the Record.
Good morning, OC. Thank you so much for having us on this morning. Good morning to everybody in the listening public as well. I hope everybody's having a good Monday so far, and really excited to be here to have the opportunity to talk about the regulations that are out for consultation right now.
And good morning, Miss Janet. Miss Flynn, how are you?
Good, thanks, OC. Morning to everyone, morning to the listening public, and happy Monday to everyone. Yeah. And thank you all for having us here this morning.
Okay. And I just want to mention that we were supposed to be joined by the minister as well, but unfortunately, he's unable to be here, with us. But we will trot along anyway, and we certainly understand the reasons for his absence as well. Now, I know, Ms. Jennifer, that in addition to the regulations, people are going to want to hear more about the whole issue of human tissue transplant and donation as well. So before we get into the regulations themselves, let's talk about the whole legislation.
Okay. So for many years now, there's been some efforts. There were a number of efforts made to try and put forward some legislation to create a framework to facilitate organ and tissue transplantation and donation here in the Cayman Islands. One of the, I think most of us will know somebody, or likely to know somebody, who either has benefited from or could benefit from an organ donation. An example would be somebody who is on dialysis. The chances are that they're on a waiting list for a kidney. And the issue that we have as a country is because we don't participate in a network, a donation network, our patients aren't given the same priority as patients in countries that do donate into the network. So the hope was that if we could facilitate participation in an organ donation network, link into one of the established networks in the States, for example, then our patients would have an increased priority on the list and be able to get the kidney, for example, with a dialysis patient that they need. I personally know a few people that have benefited from that, but they've spent a long time on a waiting list, waiting to get that phone call to say, get on the air ambulance. You need to come right now. We've got the kidney for you. A friend of mine who benefited from having a liver transplant when she was in her teens, she's gone on, because of that transplant, she's gone on and been able to live a very full life. She's, gone on and had a very successful career, had some children. And if it hadn't been for that donation of that liver that was then transplanted successfully, she would have had a much shorter life and she probably wouldn't be with us today. So it's, it's one of those things that if you're able to donate your organs, and it's generally after death, one donor can benefit. I can't remember what the number is. It's like 9 or 10 other people potentially,
Yes.
assuming all of their organs that are suitable for the donation. There was quite a tragic story up in Canada quite recently. There was a hockey team that was going to a playoff game, and they had an absolutely catastrophic traffic accident, and 16 people on the team died. But one of the real stories of hope that came out of it is one of these young men was an organ donor, and he was able to, his organs were donated and saved 9 other people's lives, a heart, a lung, a liver, the kidneys. And so it's just an incredibly powerful thing to think that, upon your death, there might be an opportunity for you to save all of these other people's lives, or even, even if it's not necessarily life and death, to make their lives that much better. If you have somebody who's in need of a lung transplant, think about the difference between what the struggle must be for them to breathe, and then they get these new lungs, and think of the change in their lives. And one very vocal recipient that I think everybody will know locally is Robert Hamady. And he if you speak to him, and he's on our steering committee for the regulations, it's an incredibly amazing story to hear. He was literally, he was days away from his demise, and he'd been waiting, and that heart came through. And so those are the people who have been lucky. But for everybody locally that's been lucky like that, I would wager that there's going to be people who didn't get that call, who didn't get that kidney, who weren't able to be beneficiaries. And it's because we're not participating in a network, and so we don't have the same priority. So one of the, we see this as a real opportunity for us as a country to get into having a good framework to regulate it, because you absolutely want to make sure. You hear horror stories about the guy waking up in the back alley with a scar and no kidney. We want to protect against that. But we want to give, our people the opportunity, first of all, to sign up and register as donors, and it will be an opt-in system. You will have to sign up. Some systems are opt-out, where everybody's considered a donor unless they've signed something saying they don't want to be. The system that's being proposed for us is an opt-in. So in order to become a donor, you have to sign that. You have to register. So to have that opportunity to be a donor, and to know that you have the opportunity to make that donation and potentially impact so many people upon your death, but also for us to be able to link into a network and have our patients go up on the priority list once we're a donating country. And hopefully so many of our patients who are waiting will be higher up and have a much better chance.
Okay, and for the benefit of our listening and viewing audience, in terms of once those procedures are ready to take place, they would not necessarily take place in this jurisdiction, but somewhere else. The transplants.
No, the transplants would be taking place here.
Here?
Yeah. So under the legislation, some of a healthcare facility can apply to cabinet to be designated as a tissue bank or a transplant center. So one of the things with organ transplants and tissue transplants is that timing is really critical.
Yes.
And the organs have a fairly fixed viability, although there's some incredible research going on looking at how to extend that viability once it's been harvested. So the procedures would be able to be done here, but again, they would be governed by the legislation and the Human Tissue Council that's proposed to be introduced. So the legislation, the law, has actually been on the books since 2013, but it hasn't been commenced. It's not in force.
Right.
And the reason why is because we needed to get these regulations put in place before we could put the law into force. So we're now at the stage where we've got these draft regulations that we're looking for the public feedback on, and we're hoping to be able to get Cabinet's approval to put them into force as well as the law and move forward.
Okay. We still have about 3 minutes before we go to our first commercial break. I want to get Ms. Flynn in on the conversation as well, and let's talk a little bit more about the regulations. And just for the sake of transparency as well, I should declare the fact that I am a member of that steering committee, as well. And my family certainly, had an experience, and a decision was made with one of our family members, my son, on his demise, and the willingness to donate his organs, as well. So, Ms. Flynn?
Well, about the regulations. So some of the highlights of the regulations, they were passed in Cabinet in January 2017, the draft regulations, and then Cabinet gave us permission to appoint a steering committee, and that steering committee reviewed the draft regulations that we had in place. And as Jennifer said, we're now out for public consultation. And one of the highlights of those regulations are we have to designate a facility. Cabinet has to designate that facility as a healthcare facility that can conduct transplants or whatever. And the other thing is that it will allow persons under the regulations. There are a number of forms, and it will allow persons to specify which tissues they would or would not like to donate, or whether they want to use their tissue organ for research, whether they want it to be used for medical research. They also have the opportunity that persons who are registered can also revoke their consent should they register and decide, I've changed my mind, I'm not in agreement anymore. That ability is there under the regulations as well. And the tissue bank, which will be regulated by the Human Tissue Council, will regulate the export and import of any organs or tissues. So there are certain guidelines that have to be in place to make sure that these organizations or these facilities, these designated healthcare facilities, comply with those guidelines and best practices. And those are some of the highlights of the regulations. Of course, under the regulations, the register will be established, and there's a form, a very comprehensive form, which outlines what needs to be added to the form or what's to be included in the form by each donor. So those are some of the highlights of the regulations. And of course, I'm sorry, there are also fines, serious fines, if you're not in compliance with the law and the regulations, because we want something that will act as a deterrent so that there's no kind of commercial dealings.
Okay, we're going to take a commercial break. Now, when we return, we want to talk, mention a little bit as well about data protection, the safety and security of a person's personal information as well. Folks, please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly where we're discussing the human transplant and tissue regulations in relation to that, the discussion has taken place with Ms. Jennifer Ahern, Ms. Janice Flynn, who is a senior policy advisor in the ministry, and of course, Ms. Ahern is the chief officer in the Ministry of Health as well. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're discussing an extremely important subject this morning. That subject is the Human Tissue Donation and Transplant Regulations 2018. Those regulations are out for consultation. The consultation period is a 60-day period, and it ends on May the 7th of this year, May the 7th. We know that here in the Cayman Islands, we have a tendency of ignoring things, and then when the dateline arrives, then people say, oh, can you extend that for another month or two? And there's public pressure and everything for the extension of it because people have not had an opportunity to review the particular document. In this case, it is the Human Tissue Donation and Transplant Regulation 2018. The committee and the chief officer, as well as the minister, will be doing rounds on the talk shows, whether it be radio or television, to promote this as well. So there will be a lot of publicity. It is extremely important to people here in the Cayman Islands. You have heard the chief officer, Ms. Jennifer Ahern, talking about her ability to be on a list, an international list, for human organ and tissue donation, because of the fact that we don't have the legislation and everything in place here in the Cayman Islands. We're in the process of doing that. We all have loved ones who have some form of illness, and this may be able to help. It is also will prick your social conscience, and depending on your religious or your personal beliefs, you may decide that you want to be a donor, or a family member may want to be a donor, and you can explain the whole process to them. So we want you to listen extremely carefully to this. We want you to participate as much as possible because it is of importance to everyone. Now, before we went to the commercial break, I spoke to Ms. Flynn about privacy, the right to privacy, the confidentiality, the security of a person's personal details and data as well, because we know many people have concerns about that. What we're going to do during the course of the show is basically try to cover as much as we can in the regulations, point by point. And if we get an opportunity, also want to talk about some of the other members on the committee in term, if not their names, definitely what their designations are in terms of what they brought to the table, because there were many experts there. I mean, there were times when I was sitting there and I was dumbfounded about the terminology and everything else, but I listened. I certainly listened. So let's throw the mic back over to Ms. Flynn. So,
OC, you talked about confidentiality, and there's a section under the law which speaks to confidentiality, and there are also penalties, a $50,000 fine if you breach any of the information that you have collected in terms of registering a donor. There's also another section under the regulations, since we're more focusing on the regulations this morning, which talks about access to information. And the council shall not allow access to the information contained in the register except to a donor or the donor's next of kin in respect of a donation made by the donor or registered in the donor's name, and a tissue bank or a transplant center for the purpose of determining whether a person is a registered donor. So these two components of both the law and the legislation actually deals with whether you breach confidentiality, whether you release information to someone who you shouldn't release information to. I basically think that should cover it, because I think the $50,000 is a good deterrent for anybody. Yeah, so I don't know whether Jennifer want to add anything else to that.
But just to re-emphasize, as we were talking about before the break, that what's being proposed is an opt-in system. So it's not that everybody will automatically be put on the list, which is in some countries that's what they have. If as soon as you get your driver's license, you're considered a donor, unless you opt out. The legislation that we have here is putting the onus on us as individuals, or actually I would say the opportunity to us as individuals to register as a donor. So as you mentioned, if you're not comfortable with it, if it's something that doesn't sit with your beliefs, you don't need to worry about it, because you don't have to do it. But it creates the opportunity for us to do it. And as Janet said, there are some pretty stiff penalties in the legislation if there's a breach in the confidentiality. So certainly there are some provisions in place to make sure that the information that's on the register is held in confidence. It's only used when it needs to be used. For example, it would be, as the regs say, that the tissue bank or the transplant center can get the information to determine whether a person is a registered donor. So if, for example, I'm in a motor vehicle accident, I end up in A&E, I'm brain dead, they could contact the register and say, is Jennifer Hearn a registered donor? And they would say yes, and she has agreed to donate whatever you want, or, and we do have within the regulations are some forms that when you register as a donor, you can register to say that you only want to donate certain organs and tissues, or that you can donate whatever you want. For example, in Ontario, when I got my driver's license, I registered. They have an opt-in system. And at the time that I registered, they did have an option to say, would you donate all of, whichever tissues, and would you donate your cadaver for medical school? and it's a funny thing, because obviously I'll be deceased. It wouldn't be impacting me one way or the other. But at the time, I thought, they can have whatever organs and tissues they want, but I don't want to be a cadaver for medical school. So I ticked everything except that box. And we have a similar opportunity here with the forms that we have, in terms of being able to say, you can take my kidneys, you can have my liver, but you can't have my eyes or my heart or my lungs. Or you can register and say, whatever you can use, please use. So, it's an opt-in system, and there's also, once you've opted in, there's still some discretion that you have as a donor to say what you want to donate or what you don't want to donate.
Okay. Now, can a family member make a decision for you if you hadn't registered as a donor, but you unfortunately reached that situation where it is, you're passed on? Can that family member, any family member, make that decision for you under our legislation?
So under our legislation, unfortunately, the answer is no. So really, again, it's to us as individuals to make sure that if that is one of your wishes, that you would like to be an organ donor, that you do get registered when you have that opportunity. Because under the legislation, your family members won't be able to make that decision for you when you're incapacitated or deceased. So it's quite strict in terms of that must be the donor who's given the consent. The consent must be in writing in accordance with the forms, and it has to be registered. So, if it is a situation where, the family member hasn't registered, again, the motor vehicle accident is a classic case where this tends to come up. We wouldn't have the ability for the family to then come and say, well, I know that they really wanted to be an organ donor, but they hadn't gotten around to it. Unfortunately, in that situation, under the legislation as it's drafted, we wouldn't be able to harvest those organs because the donor had not put their consent in writing before they were incapacitated. Okay.
And do we anticipate that at any point in time we may get to like some other jurisdictions, as far as, in terms of opting in and indicating that on, say, your driver's license when you obtain it, or something else? Yeah. Or are we just likely to have the registration process? We know that's what we have now, but are we likely to move forward with it? What are the possibilities?
I think we'll have to see. I think time will tell. I think when the policy decision was made to go with an opt-in process rather than opt-out, it was because there was some concern that people, because it's new and it's unfamiliar, and it's quite a big thing. This isn't a small thing. This is, you're talking about making a decision to donate your organs and tissues upon your demise. And some people might be nervous about that. They might think it's a bit of a violation of, their body after their death. And so the decision was taken because they thought an opt-in system would be a better way to introduce it. But studies have shown in countries where the opt-out system, where you have to opt out, where everybody's a donor until you take the step to opt out, the donation rates are significantly higher. The number of people who benefit from those donations obviously is going to be significantly higher. And so I think it might be something as we go forward, once we've got the legislation in place, if people start to see the benefits of it, and if it might be something we could look at in the future. And I know that there's countries and jurisdictions that have the opt-in that are actively looking at whether they need to move to the opt-out, because the donation rates just aren't as high as they would like them to be. And interestingly, the example I spoke about earlier about the young hockey player who donated, they found that there was a spike in registrations of donors in the days following the news story that went out saying that this young man had saved so many people's lives. And again, it's a jurisdiction that has opt-in. So I think we'll see with time. Once it's established, once people have a better familiarity with it and understanding, it might be something that we do look at moving towards.
Okay, folks, we're going to go to our 8 o'clock news. When we return, the conversation will continue. We're talking about the Human Tissue Donation and Transplant Regulations 2018. They're out for consultation now. For those of you who may not have an opportunity to read it, we're going to try to give you as much of a visual picture as possible of what the regulations are about, and that may help you. That may help to guide you in terms of your decision to register as well. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back immediately after the 8 o'clock news.
Thank you, Mr. Conner. And studio time now by Price Right.
Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're talking about human tissue and organ transplant donation regulations. In the studio with us, we have the Chief Officer in the Ministry of Health, Ms. Jennifer Ahern, and we also have Senior Policy Advisor in the Ministry, Ms. Janet Flynn. At some point, we're going to talk about some of the frequently asked questions as well in relation to this. Meanwhile, during the break, or just before the break, we had a few messages come in and questions as well. And one of our listeners says, "Good morning, interesting topic. Given it's opt-in, can they make it easy and convenient as possible, like the forms at licensing department for new folks getting licensed and even those going for renewals? If the form is readily available and folks don't have to go elsewhere, it may be more likely for people to sign up." I'll give you an opportunity to comment on that one, and then we have some more as well.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent suggestion, and certainly something that we would be looking at putting in place. I think we haven't had those discussions yet with vehicle licensing or other partners. Another place might be immigration department when people are going for work permits, if we had the forms available there as well. But it's something that once we have the Human Tissue Council appointed, once the regs are passed and the laws in place, those sorts of details would definitely be something that we'd be looking at. But absolutely, I think the listener has hit it on the head. It has to be convenient for people. With an opt-in system, we want to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for people to sign up to become organ donors. So it's an excellent suggestion and one we'll definitely look at putting in place.
Okay, and another one says, "Good morning. Can someone take us through the steps of when an organ is being transported from the Cayman Islands to the tissue bank?"
Okay. It's the process is one, and unfortunately we don't have any of you mentioned all the members of our committee, and we had a number of medical practitioners on that committee who have experience in this area. So you'll have to forgive me if I'm not completely up to speed on the details of the medical processes behind it. But we mentioned before the break, the urgency. There's a real need to make sure that you get the recipient and the organ together very, very quickly. Donated organs have very finite lifespans outside of the human body. And while there's a lot of research going on to look at how you can extend that to facilitate the transport and the longevity of the organ before it's transplanted, it's still an area that's very much in a developing stage. So, one example that I am aware of locally, a local patient who was on a waiting list, they got the call, they had to get on an air ambulance and get to where the kidney was. So there was a patient who was on life support, who was a registered organ donor, who they determined was a match for the local patient. The local patient got the call, got on an air ambulance in the middle of the night, and went straight to the hospital in the States, where they then harvested the organ and transplanted it into the local patient. So I'm not sure if that would be a similar scenario for ours, if the patients would have to come here to facilitate it, or if it was a patient in, say, South Florida, I'm sure we could get the organ there fast enough once it had been harvested. So I think it will depend largely on things like which organ it is that's being donated, the location of the recipient patient, the location of the donors, and so on. And those are all details. One of the discussions we had when we were putting the law together is to make sure that there was provisions in place to govern the importation and export of the organs and tissues, because again, we want to guard against human trafficking, trafficking in the organs. So there are provisions in place for the Human Tissue Council to issue permits to the people who are importing or exporting the organs. So again, we envision that it would be if we're part of a donor network in the States, an established donor network, that as long as the organ was being sent by them, we would make sure that we were satisfied with their vetting of the process to make sure that we were satisfied that it was done in accordance with proper consent and everything else, that would be a protection against it as well. So there's a lot of details that are going to have to get worked out and finalized once we're looking at operationalizing it. But what we've got proposed, what we have between the law and the regulations, is a framework to make sure that we're aware of what we need to make provisions for to govern, to facilitate it and make sure we're protecting against things that we might not want to see happening.
And as you said, the law was passed in 2013. We didn't have the regulations, and that is what's being worked on now to be finalized as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's been quite a long road getting to this point. There was a committee that started working under Dr. Tomlinson, who was the chair of the Health Practice Commission at the time, I think. They started looking at it back in 2010, or no, earlier than that, 2005. And then in 2010, Elio Solomon, who was a member of the Legislative Assembly at the time, brought a private member's motion to try and progress the legislation. Our ministry then worked with Mr. Solomon and a committee at the time to come up with the human tissue transplant law, which was passed by the Legislative Assembly in 2013, but as we said, is not yet in force because we needed the regulations. And so now we've had our stakeholder committee, which, as you mentioned, you've been part of, and thank you for participating in that, as well as all of the other members. And we now have these draft regulations that are out for consultation. Cabinet's given us the approval to take them out. We issued them in early March for a 60-day public consultation period. Once we get the public's feedback, we'll go back to Cabinet and let them know what the public has said. We'll do a report to Cabinet and make any changes that need to be made, and then move forward from there.
Okay. And for the benefit of our listening and viewing audience, those who may have joined us late, we're going to go over some of the frequently asked questions in relation to human tissue donation and transplant regulations. Let's start with, is there, and I'll ask the question, and then both of you can answer them. Is there currently a human tissue donation register in the Cayman Islands?
No, not yet. Not until the law has commenced.
Okay.
Then we'll bring that into force.
And when will the register be created, and what format will it take?
The register will be created once the law has been commenced and the regulations have been passed. And then Cabinet will appoint the members, because there has to be a human tissue transplant council, which has to be approved by Cabinet. And then they are the persons who will do the registration and do the registry of donors. So it's the council, it's a responsibility of the Human Tissue Transplant Council, which cannot be established until the law and regs come into force.
Okay. Convince me as to why I should register, and not necessarily me personally, because I believe that that you're almost making the ultimate sacrifice, or your last good gesture in terms of being in this earthly sphere by donating, a tissue, an organ that can help to sustain someone else while I'm on my way out of the door. Convince me.
I think, we've been talking about the fact that most likely everyone who's listening has a loved one or a friend who could benefit potentially if somebody was able to donate an organ. One case, for example, is people who are on dialysis, people with diabetes or who are end-stage kidney failure and on dialysis. If they were able to get a new kidney, think about what an improvement their lives would have. They'd be off dialysis. They'd be able to live a full life again. And it's, there's other examples. We mentioned Mr. Hamady, Robert Hamady, who was also on our committee for these regulations. And he is incredibly proud and vocal and a huge proponent for, if it hadn't been for someone else's selfless move of being an organ donor, he wouldn't be with us here today. And so many of the things that he's been able to achieve and so many of the contributions he's been able to make to the Cayman Islands wouldn't have been possible if it hadn't been for somebody making that decision to register to become an organ donor. His story is an incredible story. He talks about how he was in the hospital, and it's too bad he wasn't able to join us this morning, but he is going to come with us on another show.
22 years.
He's celebrating decades post-transplant, and and it's just an amazing story. And if you ever have the opportunity to hear him tell it, I had goosebumps and tears in my eyes at the same time. It was just an amazing thing. And so to my mind, when you hear a story like that, to think that I could have the opportunity to have that effect on someone's life. Like I'm now deceased, and my organs now could bring that kind of joy, that kind of life. This is, in the case of Mr. Hamady, this is a father, a grandfather. Those children wouldn't have had him here. They would never have known him if it hadn't been for somebody making that decision to be an organ donor and donating their heart. So for me personally, to think that I could have the opportunity to have that kind of impact in someone's life is just an incredible, incredible thing. And, if I'm deceased, I'm finished with my organs. I'm not going to need them anymore. And if now my kidneys could mean that somebody who's, a young person on dialysis gets a kidney, or even an older person on dialysis gets a kidney and gets a new lease on life, can become a more productive member of our community again, can, play with their kids or their grandkids. I mean, it's just, I find it an absolutely amazing thing to think that as individuals, we could make that difference in someone's lives. And again, it's a big decision. It's a scary thought in a lot of ways to think, that once you're deceased, that your organs would be harvested and end up in another human being. But I guess it's, if you ever have the chance to talk to somebody who's been a recipient, I think you wouldn't need a lot more convincing to know that it's an incredibly impactful thing to do. And again, a tremendous opportunity to make such a difference in someone's life.
Okay.
The other thing, sorry to interrupt,
Janet,
is that it allows us to become a part of an organ donation network as well, where we can gain some kind of priority with international registry. So that is good too.
Yes.
Other than the convincing piece. So we're not just benefiting ourselves here, but we'll benefit others.
Exactly. Okay, we're going to take a commercial break. When we come back, we have a very interesting question from one of our listeners as well. So please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're discussing the human tissue donation and transplant regulations 2018 with Chief Officer in the Ministry of Health, Ms. Jennifer Ahern, and also with the Senior Policy Advisor in the ministry, Ms. Janet Flynn. Very interesting, important question. Will minors be able to be donors?
No, persons under the age of 18 years will not be able to register as a donor, but their parents can consent. Should the child, let's say the child wanted to save a brother's life or a sister's life, the parents are able to register that child if the need arises.
For
But they
regenerative
can't-
tissue
for
only.
regenerative tissue only, which is
Mhm.
tissue that considered that can grow back after it's put in the body,
Mhm.
such as like the liver.
Mhm. Yeah, so there is a restriction in the legislation, in the law. It says that you cannot remove non-regenerative tissue from the body of a living child, but you can, with the parental consent, and the forms for the consent are in the regulations. Regenerative tissue could be removed from the living child. But as Janet said, in terms of signing up on the registry, the minimum age is 18 in order to register to be a donor.
Okay. Now, we know that Minister Seymour was unable to be with us this morning, but I want to share with you a quote from the Honorable Minister, and that was issued in a press release last month as well. And he's quoted as saying, "This is an extremely important piece of legislation which will have a profound impact on our people who desperately need an organ or tissue transplant. At the moment, patients in the Cayman Islands have to travel overseas for this surgery, which is often inconvenient and sometimes impossible. The ability to have a transplant center on island will make an immediate, immeasurable difference to patients who face organ failure or require organ tissue donation."
Yeah, well, that's a mouthful, but it's
Yes,
absolutely
yes,
true.
Yes.
And and I think that's one of the things, as we've been talking about, that there's a tremendous benefit for us as a country to having this legislation come into force, to having an organ donation network established, to having the Human Tissue Council in place to oversee it. And as Janet has said earlier, being part of an international network will help increase our patients' priority as recipients for these organs. So it's really a potentially significant benefit, we think.
Okay, I'm going to double up on some of these frequently asked questions. Who is defined as a donor, and what organ / tissues can be donated?
Ms. J, you want to talk that?
So the donor is, as defined under the regulations, is a person who registers to donate or donates one or more tissues, whether the donation occurs during the person's lifetime or after death. So you can donate while you're alive, as well as you can donate after death when you're deceased.
And actually, if people, if they're not still in their cars, if they want to take a look at the website for the ministry,
Yes.
the regulations are up there, the FAQ is up there. Our ministry website is www.ministryofhealth.gov.ky, and they'll find the information there. And in the regulations, in the consultation draft, in the schedule, are the forms for registration as a donor. And you'll see if you look at it, and obviously this isn't how the final format will look in terms of how pretty we'll make it. But, the information that's required is there, and it's very straightforward. It's your name, your address, your telephone number, your email address, your date of birth, whether you're male or female, the tissues that you wish to donate, and whether you want to donate them for transplantation only or transplant and organ and tissue research. And then you have the option to donate any needed tissue or organ. You can specify on a list the following tissue or organs only, or you can say any needed tissue or organs except for those indicated below, and you can tick which ones you do not want to donate. And then my little one at the bottom about I do not wish my donated tissues or organs to be used as cadaver for medical or scientific purposes. And then just a signature, and then somebody to witness your signature. That's the form that we have in the regs. It's very straightforward, we think. and very easy for people to use. So the tissues that you might want to donate are your kidneys, your heart, your eyes, bone, liver, lungs, pancreas, bone marrow, skin. Or you can just specify tick all, or specify ones that you don't want to donate. So as we were saying earlier, if you're okay with thinking that your kidneys can go, but you really can't think about giving up your heart, you still have the opportunity to register to donate your kidneys.
Yep. Okay. And we heard the minister was quoted as talking about procedures being done on island. So one of the other questions is, will transplants be carried out on island as well?
And that's the expectation, that the transplant will be done on island. Yeah. Nothing is being done at the moment, but that's the expectation once the law comes into force.
Yeah, and the healthcare centers doing those, or the healthcare facilities doing the transplants, would need to be designated by Cabinet as a transplant center. So it's not a situation where once this is in force, everybody can just start doing transplants, or they would need to get approval through Cabinet on the recommendation of the Human Tissue Council, once they're appointed by Cabinet, to be designated as a healthcare facility that does transplants or stores tissue. So we have designation as a tissue bank, which is where you would store tissue. There's not much tissue in the discussions that we had with the committee that you would expect to be stored longer than the time it takes to get the organ harvested and then out to the recipient, or the recipient to you to put the organ in place. But things like corneas, I think, was one example where you might store it and have a tissue bank that way. But the facilities will need to have that designation, and the Human Tissue Council will monitor them to make sure that they're satisfied that they're following the law and the regulations, and that designation can be suspended or revoked if the council thinks that there might be something less than optimal going on.
And if I choose to register, then what is the next step?
Well, once you've registered, then you'll be on the list. And as Janet said, there is a provision in the law, if you change your mind, that you could revoke that consent. But we're hoping that once you've registered, you will maintain that. We have, I don't know if it's something that would have to be discussed with the Human Tissue Council, whether we'd want to renew it, whether we'd want to reach out to you every 5 or 10 years and make sure that you still have that view. But I think that once you're registered, then you're on the list, and then that's all you'll need to do. Do
I get a fee? Do I get paid for registering or donating an organ? Because we know there are some jurisdictions where organs are harvested, and from an international standpoint, it is illegal, to seek compensation or to give compensation for organs. Let's talk a little bit about that, please.
There's actually no fee for donating an organ or to sign up on the register. There's no fee. What has been included in the legislation is what is called kind of a compensation for some of the, like if you were to travel, storage, so you could actually charge, and the details of that I'm not sure how that will work yet and what the council will deal with, but it's almost like a compensation for kind of reasonable costs associated with the storage or the transportation, that kind of a thing. But personally, the individual who signs up to donate, there's no fee charged.
Yeah, so in the law, Section 20 of the law, or Part 5 of the law, is about the prohibition of trading in human tissue. And Section 20 talks about the unauthorized selling of human tissue. And it says that, Section 21 says a person shall not buy, agree to buy, offer to buy, hold himself out as being willing to buy, or inquire whether a person is willing to sell tissue or the right to take tissue from the body of another person. You cannot give or receive benefits for the supply of or for an offer to supply tissue. You cannot seek to find a person willing to supply tissue for benefits. You cannot offer to supply tissue for benefits. You cannot initiate or negotiate any arrangement involving the giving of benefits for the supply of or for an offer to supply tissue. Or you cannot take part in the management or control of a body of persons, corporate or unincorporate, whose activities consist of or include the initiation or negotiation of such arrangements. So it's pretty strong in terms of, we don't want to see people getting into this situation. You hear the horror stories about, I couldn't pay my rent, so I sold my kidney. That simply will not be possible. It will be prohibited under the law. But as Janet said, it doesn't apply to the giving of reasonable costs associated with the importation, exportation of tissue, the transportation, removal, evaluation, storage, and processing of tissue to, from, or at a tissue bank, and the distribution from a tissue bank of tissue removed in accordance with this law. One example might be, I was saying on the break, my cousin was in end-stage kidney failure. His friend, and he was on a waiting list for a kidney, and he was in really dire straits. And one of his friends stepped up and said, "If I'm a match, you can have my kidney." And thankfully, he was a match. He donated his kidney, which is an incredibly, I just can't even contemplate how, that decision. But his costs, say, of his hospitalization, the cost of the surgery, and those sorts of things, you would be able to cover those under the law because he stepped forward as a donor. But you wouldn't be able to then give him another $1,000 because of his kidney. So that's the sort of situation that the law governs. So there's no fee to register, though, as a donor.
No.
But you also can't register thinking you're going to get making any money
from
for
it. Yes. Let's take a commercial break. Folks, please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I want to remind you that we're having a studio with us this morning, Ms. Jennifer Ahern from the Ministry of Health, Ms. Janet Flynn, Senior Advisor in the Ministry of Health, and of course Ms. Ahern is the Chief Officer in the Ministry of Health, and we're discussing the human tissue and transplant donation regulations in the Cayman Islands. Extremely, extremely important. We're no longer this little insular place, place that time forgot. We are no longer forgotten. We are part of the global community. We participate in it, and we need to do that as fully as possibly as we can. We're seeing more and more improved medical facilities here in the Cayman Islands, less need for people to have to travel overseas for medical attention, and we're looking to move one step closer in this process. Something where an issue that is extremely important to everyone can affect any of us either in one way or the other, either by being the recipient of an organ or tissue or being the donor as well. And in both instances, it can be rewarding. I know in some jurisdictions, like for instance in New York, there are facilities available or procedures available for the family of donors to eventually meet up with the recipients if they both agree. And we see sometimes these very inspiring stories on television where people meet up with the other person, and if a spouse has donated their heart or something like that to someone else, that person says, "Well, now I know that my spouse is now living and residing in someone else's body." It can become extremely, extremely emotional as well.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely correct. And I think, we talked earlier about the confidentiality and the provisions in the legislation for that confidentiality. And I think we would only see that sort of connection happening, as you said, with the consent of both parties. The organ donor family agreeing that information could be shared and the recipients wanting that information to be shared. Because it can go both ways. The recipient may not want anybody to know that they got, this organ or tissue, although that certainly hasn't been my experience with the recipients that I have met in my lifetime. They're all very proud of what they've got. And I don't know if proud's the right word, but, obviously it's a life-changing thing for a recipient. And the gratitude, I guess, that I've seen
of life.
Is something that I would be more surprised to see if a recipient said they didn't want to know. But definitely because we do want to respect everybody's confidentiality, that sort of a connection would have to be facilitated through the council, through the registry, and it would have to be with everybody's consent on both sides. But incredibly powerful. We've mentioned several times Mr. Hamady.
Yes.
And if you need to hear his story, because he was able to found out whose heart he received, and an incredible connection. Mr. Hamady is a pilot, and the donor was a pilot as well.
Wow.
So it's just, and a young man, he died in an aircraft accident. And so you'll have to, next time you see Mr. Hamady, ask him to tell you the story, and the story of how he went back to the site where the accident happened. It's just an amazing, amazing thing.
And he will be doing the rounds with you as well in terms of being on the talk shows and sharing his experience as well.
Yeah, he'll be with us on Friday morning on. Are we allowed to say where we're going to be?
If it's not Radio Cayman,
on
no.
the other show.
No, yeah, we have to. Well, no, it's important. This is extremely important, so we can't be partisan about it.
Yeah, so Mr. Hamady has agreed to join us on Friday morning on Crosstalk. So we're looking forward to that discussion as well. But and we've been saying, I'm sure as you're listening, if you think, you can think of somebody that maybe who's been a recipient or somebody who is waiting and could benefit. And the ability to facilitate that, to have that, as you mentioned, it's part of being part of this global world that we're now living in. And we have to understand that if the donors here, our organs are not really that likely to end up in Caymanian or resident patients, just because of having to match blood types and the timings and everything else. But by being part of a network, our patients will move up higher on the priority list to be recipients from all over, wherever that network reaches. So that's an opportunity that we don't have right now. And the patients who have been fortunate enough, our local residents, to be recipients, just think of how much sooner they might have been able to benefit, or the people who haven't been able to benefit. So we've got that opportunity to sort of address that and make sure that we are, contributing. And it's not, and as you've talked about, it's an opportunity to contribute globally. If we're part of this network and we can save, 8, 9, 10 people's lives somewhere in the world, that's still a really, really good thing to have done. And if it means that our patients now are a higher priority for receiving, then that's even better.
And we've seen an increase in the number of dialysis patients here in the Cayman Islands. What sort of hope does this now, these regulations and the law hold out for those who would be in a position to be the recipients of
Well, that
transplant?
was my next comment, because my last check is that we had over 60 patients on dialysis at the hospital. So clearly with a registry such as this, one, they will get higher priority with the International Donor Network and improve their chances and quality of life. So the registry is a good thing. And, we encourage people to sign up, because that is some hope for them to know that I don't have to be waiting for years and years because Cayman falls so low on the priority listing, versus if we have our own registry and we can tap into overseas networks. So I think that's a phenomenal thing, and the fact that we have, and it grows, the number of dialysis patients keeps growing. Yeah.
And there's also the opportunity as a donor, not just for your organ to be transplanted, but for example, somebody on dialysis might sign up as a donor, and their kidneys could then be used in research to try and look at a longer term, solution for other people suffering. You've read about some of the NFL quarterbacks who have died from the concussive disorder, who've donated their brains for research in the hopes that, by doing that, the research will help find longer term some solutions, some cures. So, really, we talked earlier about who is eligible to sign up for a donor. If I have a bad heart, should I not sign up? Absolutely, you should. You should sign up, because it could be that your kidney, your liver, your lungs, your cornea, or even if you agree that your heart could be used for medical research, depending on what your heart condition is, it might be an opportunity to sort of, I talk about leaving things better than we found them and being part of the solution and not part of the problem. If there's a chance that research on your diseased organ could help prevent somebody in the future suffering the way you've suffered, then, there's that opportunity as well.
Okay. We have a couple more minutes before we go to our next break. I want to talk about, again, some of the, I don't want to say institutions, but, some of the things that we have in place. We saw a mention of a council. We want to talk about the council, the composition of the council, its remit and everything, as well. Ms. Susan, do we want to take the 9 o'clock news now, or you still have enough time to talk? 2 minutes. We have 2 minutes that we can talk a little bit about that, and then when we return from the headline news, we can resume.
So the council is the Human Tissue Transplant Council, and that's a body that will be appointed by Cabinet. It's proposed to be a 5-member body, and one of those members should be a medical doctor. The other 4 members, I guess, we probably would. The law doesn't stipulate what the other 4 members in terms of their experience or expertise. Some of the functions of the council are to advise the minister responsible for health on policy relating to the collection and use of human tissue for medical purposes in the islands, to monitor the donation of tissue by living persons and the removal of tissue from diseased persons, to regulate and supervise any business carried on in or from within the islands in respect of the buying of tissue or the right to take tissue from the bodies of persons, and to monitor compliance with the law and to perform any other duties that may be provided in this law. So you see, it has a fairly wide remit. We hope that once we have this law and regulations enforced, then we'll hopefully be able to get those 5 members on board and get Cabinet to appoint them. They also may, other roles of the council or other functions is that they can collaborate with such persons if they consider it necessary in the collection, compilation, and publication of statistics related to the collection and use of human tissue for medical purposes, and with the approval of Cabinet, enter into arrangements with any department of government for the use of the personnel, facilities, and services of that department to any extent not incompatible with that department's operation. And this is kind of standard in most pieces of legislation where you can co-opt or collaborate with other entities to continue the work of the body. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just want to say, because Janet mentioned the statistics, the compilation of statistics, and there is a requirement in the law that says no publication of statistics under subsection 2 that she read shall contain any particulars so arranged as to enable any person to identify any particulars relating to an individual person. So again, back to that confidentiality. The confidentiality is really, really sacrosanct. There's provisions in place, even in the statistics being published by the council. It would have to be published in an anonymized. I can never get that word out. Anonymized way.
Tongue twister. That's a tongue
So
twister.
confidentiality really is key.
Okay, going to headline news at 9 o'clock. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're discussing the Human Tissue Donation and Transplant Regulations 2018. And of course, those regulations are the accompanying legislation along with the law. The law, Human Tissue and Transplant Law, was passed in the Legislative Assembly in 2013. It has not come into force yet, because what was lacking in that was the regulations. Those regulations have now been approved by Cabinet. They're out for public consultation. Those consultations are not just for professional persons like doctors and lawyers to comment on, but also for every Caymanian who has an interest in it. And we all should have an interest at some point in time, because we could either be the potential recipient of an organ or a tissue, or we could be a donor as well. So it's extremely important. And although, ladies, we have already addressed this issue, we have the same question again. And just for the sake of clarity and so that everyone hears it, they wanted to know what age range is there for donors. And we can repeat that again.
Yeah, well, you have to be 18 years old to register as a donor. So you have to be an adult by law. And I guess one of the other things that comes up sometimes too is a question about, do I have to be healthy to register as a donor? What if I'm diabetic? What if I'm, have high blood pressure, for example? Should I register as a donor or not? And do I need to have a physical exam in order to register as a donor before it can be determined if I'm healthy enough to donate or not? And what we would say is that, there isn't the test to determine whether your organ or tissue is healthy enough to be used for donation will be done upon your demise. So at this point in time, for example, someone with high blood pressure, it might be that the doctor determines when you've deceased and you're a registered donor, that maybe your heart might have been compromised, but your lungs are in amazing condition. For me personally, I have very mild asthma. So it might be that if I'm a donor, they can't take my lungs because they're technically diseased. But my kidney, my heart, my corneas, they could still harvest those. So, what we really want to encourage people to do when the opportunity is there is to register as donors, to make sure that you opt into that system, that if you have, any concerns or restrictions in terms of what you do and don't want to donate, you put that on the form. And then, at the time, when the time comes, the doctors will then be able to make the determination to say, well, we can use these organs, but not those. So, even somebody who might be sitting there thinking they're health impaired, so they can't be a donor, I would just say, please, when we have this up and running, do register to be a donor. And because you don't know, there's so many things that can be used from a deceased donor. And it might be that your corneas are exactly what somebody needs to be able to see again. And maybe your heart can't be used, or maybe one of your kidneys is not strong enough. But, just think of the opportunity that you have to donate what can be used and make sure you register.
Okay, 2 more questions. Will consultation, and this is pretty close to what you've been discussing, Jennifer. Will consultation be available to individuals who may want to be donors? And the other question has to do with what is the current situation if a family member wants to be a donor for another family member or a friend, and if they're matching, is it allowed in the Cayman Islands now?
Yes. So if your sister, your brother, your aunt, or your uncle, that is allowable there's a provision in the law for that. So that would be allowed.
Once the law is in
Once
force.
the law is in force.
But as we sit here today, the answer is no.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
The first question was
Consultation for
consultation.
donors.
For a
Absolutely.
person who wants to be a donor.
Because depending on where you are and what you're donating might even require not just consultation, but lots of counseling, lots of talking through, making sure people understand what they're getting into.
Particularly for live donors.
Yes,
Somebody
yes. But then that would be certainly for live donors. Yeah. So there would be a consultation with your medical practitioner, or probably with someone outside, or maybe a psychologist they might bring into the picture as well, different expertise to counsel the person, to talk them through, to let them know the expectations, what will happen, the possibilities, so there is room for that during the process. Yeah.
And we would really encourage people to have those conversations with their families, with their healthcare providers. And it's a bit of a segue into another piece of legislation that the ministry's been working on that will be out shortly for public consultation, which is the Healthcare Decisions Bill, which is about end-of-life decisions such as do not resuscitate, organ donation is another one, living wills, and those sorts of things. We just want to really encourage people to make sure you're having those conversations. Make sure that your wishes are known by your friends, by your family members. If you do want to, when we have this up and running, the opportunity to be an organ donor, please do talk to your friends and family about it. Talk to your medical practitioner, your primary care physician. Make sure that they're aware of your wishes. Talk to them about any concerns that you might have. Because as we've said, even though for the most part the donation will occur after you've deceased upon your death, it's still a pretty big decision to make. And one that we don't want you to enter into lightly. So we would encourage you to have those conversations.
And while you can opt in, you mentioned earlier, you can also opt out. So if you go through those consultations and at some point in time there's a change of heart, I'm sorry for the pun, and there's a change of heart, you can opt out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that is captured in the legislation, that you as a donor will retain the ability to opt out. And there are provisions in place for that. Because it is, as we've said, it's something that isn't entered into. We don't want you to enter into it lightly, and the consent has to be there.
Okay. Why the consultation? Why not just simply decide the law's there, Cabinet has approved the regulations, now we're going to go ahead and do it. We have consulted with the experts. We have had, doctors, medical doctors, practitioners on our committee, steering committee. Why not just go ahead and put it in force?
Well, I think, the ministry and Cabinet really want to hear from the public. We want to make sure that people are aware of what's being proposed. This is a piece of legislation, as we've been discussing this morning, that potentially has far-reaching benefits, but it's a big shift for us as a country. This is not, we think it's a pretty big deal to be moving forward with this, and we want to make sure that the public is aware of it. The last thing we want is for the public to think that we've tried to pull something on them overnight without checking. And also, we also see it as an opportunity to increase the awareness for the public of the potential opportunities that are there, the benefits that could come with this legislation being in place. And Cabinet really does want us to go back to them with feedback from the public. They want to know. And as you said, we've had an incredible, through the whole process, from the very beginning in 2005 to when Minister Scotland convened the committee with MLA Solomon at the time, to the committee that we have now. We've had an incredible number of stakeholders at the table with a lot of expertise. But we really want to take this opportunity to get the feedback from the public, to see, because we've been working so closely with it, this is a chance for us to get a number of fresh pairs of eyes on it, to see that it does make the sense that we think it makes, and to see if we've missed anything, if there's some provisions that we need to add, or if there's anything that, perhaps we hadn't thought of that needs to be included or addressed. So we really do want to encourage the public. And also, if you're in support, we'd like to hear that as well, because a lot of times in these situations, people hear about it, they think, oh, this is great. How could anybody possibly disagree with this? This is such a good thing. I'm so glad they're doing this. And then what we get is one or two letters from people who don't share that view, and then we have nothing positive to counter it. And we go back to the decision makers and say, well, we went out for public consultation. We heard from half a dozen people, and none of them were in support. But we know that everybody's out there in support of it. So I do want to encourage people, please do take this opportunity. The consultation period started in March. It closes on the 7th of May. And we do want to hear from you if you support it. And it can be as simple as saying, I'm so happy to hear this is going forward. Please know you have my full support, my family's full support. And, but of course, if you have concerns, we want to hear those too.
Sure. And
those comments can be sent in to Janet, actually. Her email is janett.flynn@gov.ky. So it's Janet with 2 T's, .flynn with 2 N's @gov.ky. But it's also, you can get the information on our website as well, ministryofhealth.gov.ky.
Can persons leave voice message as well if they don't want to write in?
Sure, and they can reach Janet on 244-2374.
Okay. I think we have a potential sign up here, a registrant. This person wants to know now, is there a cutoff range, cutoff age range for donors? Meaning,
No.
would you be too old?
No,
to
18 and up.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
18 and up. Because as we've been saying, you have the opportunity not just for donation for transplant, but you could donate for medical research as well. And it may be that, even if you're in later on in your years, that the organs, tissues that you have are going to be appropriate and fit for donation. So we would encourage anyone 18 and older to sign up if they're interested.
Okay, we're going to take our last commercial break. When we return, we're going to have a wrap up. We're going to pass on to you all of the important information in the next 15 minutes. Please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're discussing the Human Tissue Donation and Transplant Regulations 2018 with the Chief Officer in the Ministry of Health, Ms. Jennifer Ahern, as well as the Senior Policy Advisor in the Ministry, Ms. Janet Flynn. Those of you who have sent us emails and WhatsApp messages in terms of questions, we want to thank you very much for your participation. We haven't received any phone calls yet, but we know that you're out there listening. We know that if you have an interest, we want to pass that information on to you, whether or not you're an individual or you may even belong to an organization like the Seafarers Association or whatever, who may want to co-opt their members to encourage them to participate in this process as well. So again, we want to give you as much information as possible in relation to this consultation period. We want you to take advantage of it, and there are many ways that you can share your comments, whether it be positive or negative. We hope and trust that there are more positives than negatives, because this is something that is certainly required in the Cayman Islands. But by getting feedback from you, that will certainly help to guide the process as well. So I'm going to throw the mic back over to Ms. Jennifer and Ms. Flynn.
Yeah, actually, Janet is the person in the ministry who is receiving all of the feedback. And, again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I just want to echo what you're saying. We really do want to hear from the public on their views on what's being proposed, be it positive or negative. Sometimes we find the negative ones help us improve things, and the positive ones are great to have, to know that there's support out there as well. So I'll let Janet give you her details in terms of where you can send your comments. But again, 7th of May, so we have 2 weeks from today, is the deadline for submitting your comments. The consultation draft and the frequently asked questions that we were talking about earlier, they're on our ministry's website, which is www.ministryofhealth.gov.ky. And just to encourage people to go on the website to see the information and to get their comments to us by May 7th, and you can send them to Janet. And where will they find you, Janet?
So for those persons who have already submitted their comments, we thank you, and we thank you for the support and for taking the time to write in and to comment. For those persons who are still contemplating, we ask you to write in, share your comments. As the host and the chief officer said, it's important that you share your comments, be they positive or negative, so that we can know how we move forward with this process. And to send your comments to the ministry, you may contact me at janett.flynn, FLYNN, @gov.ky. And my telephone contact information is 244-2374. In addition, you can also visit the ministry's website at ministryofhealth.gov.ky to see the regulations, the legislation, which is the law, and the frequently asked questions flyer, and you can submit your comments there. So we ask people again to write in your comments, share with us, let us know what you're thinking, whether you support, what you plan to do, and we'll take it from there.
And that can include, as well as those persons or entities wanting to be a registered facility in the Cayman Islands as well. There may be possibly insurance companies that may have some comments, whether or not they may have clients who are covered for certain procedures or whatever. So, really all and sundry, there's a wide spectrum out there that should and must have an interest in this.
Yeah, and we're hoping to hear from all of them.
Yes.
And the contact details that Janet mentioned, they're on the website at the bottom of the FAQ document. So if you didn't catch them when she read them off, you can go to the website, download the frequently asked questions, and you'll find the contact details there as well. But absolutely, I see it's, there's a wide range of stakeholders that are going that have a role to play in this legislation, and we are hoping that we'll hear from them all, whether it is concerns or comments or support. We think it's important. We want people to be aware that it's being proposed, to have an understanding of what it is that's being proposed, and to give us their feedback on it. And so we're really grateful to have this opportunity to come this morning and talk about it.
I want to thank you as well. I'm going to shift gears for a minute because we still have a few minutes, and since we've closed the phone lines off, this isn't really censorship, but I want to say something positive about the Department of Environmental Health. We know that on the weekend, many people participated in Earth Day. Yesterday, as well as Saturday, there were organizations out there helping to clean up, members of our communities or members of our legislative assembly, the various constituencies and everything. And this morning, we're seeing positive results of that. I've seen in areas where on the roadside yesterday, there were plastic bags with debris that had been collected. Those have now been removed. There are things like truck tires and things of that nature that haven't been removed yet, but I believe I know the reason for that is that the garbage truck that picks up the regular garbage wouldn't normally pick those up. Yeah. But to see the proactive measures that the department has taken in terms of assisting in removing the debris that has been placed on the roadside by those persons, those organizations that were involved in the cleanup as well. And I want to say, kudos to the department for that. We always hear about negative things. We need to hear some of the positives as well.
Well, thanks very much for sharing that. And I know that the team at the Department of Environmental Health will be very grateful for that positive feedback. They do work very hard. They work some very difficult hours doing a very difficult job. So it's great to hear that people do recognize the work that they are doing. Thank you very much for that.
And I think even though some people, do it not for the recognition, but those persons who have volunteered their time and their expertise to assist with these regulations, I declared my interest early, the fact that I was involved in it, and I was a very small part of that. Put me aside for a minute, but all of those other professionals and the recipient, Captain Robert Hamity as well. Can we mention on air some of the members of the committee?
Yeah, sure. Janet's going to help me out.
So we had by names.
Yes.
So we had a couple of doctors on, Dr. Jefferson, Dr. Nelson, the nephrologist at the hospital. Dr. Jefferson is the medical director. Dr. Sidney Ebanks, who is at Chrissy Tomlinson Hospital. We also had the acting CMO, Dr. Sam Williams. We had Gina Berry, who is an attorney at law. Dr. Hislop as well, who is an endocrinologist. Dr. Shandy Abram, the former medical director at the Health City.
Mr.
Marvin Connolly as well was on. Our host, Mr. Connor. Did I miss anyone?
I'm trying to remember. We've had a couple of
Reshma Sharma.
Reshma from the Solicitor
from the
General's
Solicitor SG's office. I think that takes care of it. I hope I haven't missed anyone.
That's the
hope
risk
not.
that we run.
That's the risk that you run when you start naming people.
Yes.
But they were a good steering committee, and we really want to thank them for all the efforts and the meetings and their input for us to get to this stage so that we could go out to public consultation.
It was amazing the amount of information and knowledge that those doctors had in terms of the process, coming from other jurisdictions as well, where this is human tissue transplant is more prevalent.
Well
it was
established.
amazing, amazing. What they brought to the table as far as expertise, was concerned, and extremely, extremely grateful for them. And it is important for the people, the public, to recognize that when people give of their time and of their expertise in these situations, that we need to acknowledge that, because a lot of that goes on where they're not paid, they don't expect to be paid, they don't want to be paid, for what they're doing, because it is a part, especially in the doctors' cases, I would imagine, forms a part and parcel of their Hippocratic oath as well.
Yeah, no, they do give very generously. A lot of people give very generously of their time and their expertise, and really work closely with us to progress a lot of these things, and we really couldn't do it without their input, and we are very grateful for that as well. So yeah, we do want to make sure that we thank them. And Janet's just double checking the list.
Make sure I haven't missed anyone.
Make
Chief
sure
Officer, of course, who was a chair. Chief Officer.
Yes, and she did an excellent
Absolutely.
job.
Thank you.
Excellent
But
job as well.
I've captured everyone.
Yeah.
Yes, I didn't miss anyone.
And she has a wide knowledge of it too. I don't know if she, acquired that during the course of between the law and the regulations as well.
Yeah, we, as I was mentioning earlier, it's been quite a long road to get to this point, and we have had the benefit of a lot of advice and expertise from a lot of different stakeholders, and so it's been an incredible learning process for me. As I mentioned early on in the broadcast, I registered when I got my license when I was growing up in Canada. I registered as an organ donor, and so now to have the opportunity to facilitate that being created here is just incredible for me. And I didn't really understand at the time that I signed up. I knew it was a good thing to do, but I didn't fully appreciate how good of a thing it could potentially be. And now, having worked on the legislation, on the law and the regulations, I've been very, very lucky to have that opportunity and learn so much about it. So.
And I'm sure that some of the feedback, one of the things that you would want to hear too, whether or not people feel that we should move forward eventually in terms of having, like the driver's license, when you get your driver's license, indicating on there whether or not you want to be an organ donor, or even if you become a registered elector, whether or not you want to be an organ donor at that point in time. And again, keeping the opt-out option there as well. So if you have a change of mind or heart later on, that you can simply go ahead and do that as well. Yeah,
we'll certainly look at making it as easy as possible for people to sign up if they wish to register when the opportunity is there. So,
Okay, well, I want to thank you two ladies. Anything else that you want to...
two quick things.
Sure, go right ahead.
First is just to remind everybody that the Department of Health Regulatory Services and the Health Insurance Commission is still looking for public feedback on the what we're calling the SHIC 65 Plus, the Standard Health Insurance Contract 65 Plus survey. The survey is open until April 30th. You can go to the Department of Health Regulatory Services, or DHRS website, and just to encourage everybody of all ages to take a few minutes to go online and complete the survey. We're looking at the feasibility of whether we want to introduce a tailored health insurance plan for 65 plus. By no means are we committed to going down that road yet. We're really just looking to see if it makes sense, but we want to get some feedback from the public. So please, April 30th is the deadline for that survey, and we do want to encourage people of all ages to do that. And then I would be completely remiss in my duties as co-chair of the Deputy Governor's 5K if I didn't just throw out a pitch to remind everybody that the grand finale, we've had our event in Cayman last weekend, 2 weekends ago. Many, many thanks to everyone in the BRAC who came out. We were in Little Cayman this weekend, where we had a completely unique 5K, complete with a slightly longer course, chocolate croissants at the halfway mark, and we had to delay the race to let a plane cross the road. So that's a pretty unique experience, but we had great support from the people in Little Cayman. Thanks to everybody who was there. And this weekend is, of course, the event here, April 29th, starting at the Government Administration Building. Registrations online at CaymanActive/DG5K, and T-shirt and bib pickup, the race number pickup, starts this morning, 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock, Monday to Friday this week. You need to go online and register. You need to get here before Friday to pick up your T-shirt and your race bib. We're raising funds for Meals on Wheels, Feed Our Future, and Kiwanis Kids Breakfast. Please come out. You've got trophies for the corporate cup with the private company with the most entrants, the schools cup. Cayman Prep hopefully is coming out to defend their schools cup. But I think St. Ignatius and some of the other schools might give them a run for the money. But Cayman Active /DG5K, and come on out on Sunday morning.
Okay. Thank you all very much, folks. I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I also want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters' keepers. There is always someone out there who's less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. And what better way to be your brother and your sisters' keepers and extending a helping hand or a helping leg or a helping heart or a helping lung or a helping kidney by being a donor and participating in the human tissue donation and transplant consultation. And after that consultation period is over, registering as a donor as well.
For the Record is brought to you by Fidelity Bank. For all your banking and pension needs, call it.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.